Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Alpha Gallery's Meet the Artist series. My name is Katya Cronky Wisdom, and I am here with Kay Kenny, who is an exhibiting artist for the New Brunswick Art Salon Photography Exhibition. Hi, Kay. How are you today?
Nice to meet you.
So good to meet you too. So you said in your bio that you also write about art and you paint as well. How do these worlds influence your photography practice?
Well, as a painter, I started out as an illustrator, and that was my major, illustration and design, graphic design. And I decided, and at that point, the photography world was opening up in a major way in the art schools. And it shifted the way photography was taught. Um, and as a painter, I wanted to control my imaging. So I started out doing photo printmaking and then moved to straight photography, but always with the idea of recreating essentially the same kind of the idea of visualizing beforehand, not finding an image, but visualizing the image and creating it as a photographic image is really what where that all came from.
That's really amazing. This is really amazing. I cannot imagine with the digital world what you've been able to do as these things have changed.
Well, long before digital, I was doing photo
Yeah.
printmaking and non-silver processes. Now, non-silver, I don't know if you're familiar with non-silver.
No.
There you essentially are painting an emulsion, a handmade emulsion onto watercolor paper. And in the process of doing that, you have the freedom to add imaging to that through painting, through gouache, watercolor, whatever you want to work with, depending on your material. You can draw directly onto the image. You're working on watercolor paper, which is a surface that allows you that kind of freedom. When digital came along, the ability to build within the computer in Photoshop was a big shift, but it
I
didn't
imagine.
change that whole process of kind of pre-visualizing. The big difference was that in non-silver, you don't get to make mistakes.
Ah,
Once you mark that paper, it's marked, no going around. So the whole discipline had to change a little bit.
that makes sense. That makes sense. My apologies, Kay. It seems that my Wi-Fi was acting up a little bit. Could you answer the first question just one more time briefly so that
Oh, I'm sorry.
make
Is
sure to
it
have it? No, my apologies. I'm not sure what's happening, but
Well,
yeah.
essentially what I was trying to say was that as starting as an illustrator, graphic designer, moving into painting, and then discovering photography in graduate school as part of a background in printmaking and painting, I wanted to create the images that I saw in my head, just as I had done in graphic design, just as I had done in painting. So I was to work with as a photographic image within the body of work. That is, at that time, it was printmaking and non-silver processes.
Yeah.
Does that help? Is
Yes,
that
that
clear?
does. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I have also noticed in your artistic practice, you often reference nature and nighttime, for example,
So,
your work with sea paintings. Yeah, could you further
I,
discuss these themes?
well, one of the wonderful things about night photography is you get to paint with light, and sky, but the landscape itself can shift dramatically by using flashlights. So I was
Ah,
absolutely in love with the idea that quite literally create a scene using flashlights, determining what I wanted to have important in the image and play with it. And initially, I did this with film, where I did
mm,
not have any options in terms of going into Photoshop and fixing anything.
yeah,
Um, I simply would set up 3 or 4 cameras in different locations after planning it all during the day.
right.
And then I'd go out there. If I wore white, I would show up. If I wore black, I didn't. And using flashlights, I would create the scene, depending on what part of the scene I wanted to really emphasize.
Right. And I imagine, I mean, does this play into what you were talking about earlier with your desire to really envision what you wanted to create using photography?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
would go out there, and of course, this is all trial and error. It's very difficult to actually know what really happened. All kinds of stuff will happen as a chance in working in an environment like that. A rural environment, in addition to the kind of light that you might get from the sky and weather conditions, there's this the dew factor. That is, when the that dew point hits, your camera
Ah,
can get covered with dew, and
right.
that can dramatically create another kind of image. So
Yeah.
there were lots of challenges, but I love those challenges. Just like painting, you never quite know. You put a mark on the canvas, and uh, do I like it? Do I don't like it? What I want? Is this really working? It's the same idea.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
And you asked me about nature. Well, I'm really very much a person who likes to observe nature. An ardent gardener, so all of that plays into it.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And this is a perfect segue considering now for us the garden of earthly delights that you've given us. Can you described a lack of control, and
Yeah.
yeah, I was wondering if you could go further into that and the digital reassemblance. How did that all play together?
Well, during the pandemic, when we were all kind of locked up, um, the idea that I would go back into my own garden and work in a way that was very similar to what was going on in the rest of the world. That is, there was no control. We had no idea what was going to happen to us. So I put the camera on the ground and I focused it up using flashlights, created the lighting, but had no idea what the camera was going to see, where it was focused, or anything.
Wow.
And the, the, the result of that was that I had an awful lot of images that were a complete surprise to me. And when they worked, they were wonderful. When the lot didn't work, it was a real challenge. It's like photographing being blind.
Yeah,
But
imagine.
I like the idea of dealing with this lack of control, this sense of being disconnected from the world, which
Wow.
I felt was what I was feeling during the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you talked about just earlier about how you would approach photography with an idea in your mind. In this case, when you have this lack of control, did you have an idea in your mind, or was it just were you really just trying to see what would happen?
I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see how it would look photographing from that particular perspective, which is, I said, not something unless I was willing to lie on the ground myself, I was not going to be able to really visualize. And also, when you're photographing under those circumstances, it's very difficult to see the camera. I mean,
Mm,
even if you have the viewing screen, because of the way the light is reflected off the viewing screen and how dark it is.
yeah.
And the other thing I want to mention is that throughout all of this, one of the guiding lights for me has been surrealism. That's always been the of all the art world history that I've absorbed, surrealism has been the one thing that has stayed with me because obviously it's very close to that kind of strange narrative that I'm trying to create in my work.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not talking about limpid watches, I'm talking about the whole concept of surrealism, which goes back to Hiroshima Bosch, who I could always
Yes,
consider to be the first surrealist.
that is a wonderful point, and I was that is on my question. So let's jump right into this. So about Bosch, did you expect these photographs to follow this theme, or did it just
No.
unfold this way?
No. I look to Bosch for an inspiration. I look for him for the same kind of tension that he creates in his images. People who are looking, who created their own hell, in a sense.
Yeah.
When you look at Bosch, you have the heavens above and people below who are in hell. And
Mhm.
it's clearly from the creators, the people that he creates, the kinds of imaging activities that are involved, that they created their own hell. So in some ways, I felt what was going on during the pandemic was very close to what Bosch was describing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have that sense of creation also from looking up from the bottom, looking up towards the heavens.
Wow.
So it's, I wasn't trying to copy Bosch. I was just trying to use his
Yeah.
concept.
Yeah. And did you find my original question was you talk about in your correspondence with this Boschian aesthetic, you talked about the concept of heaven and hell, which you've already unpacked a bit, but in adding in also a correspondence with surrealism, was there any feeling of a spirituality in these photographs as they were coming out?
Um, yes, I think that I was trying to capture some of that. And that's why the sky was so important, to capture that night sky, that sense of there's another world out there. There are other worlds, whether they be heaven or what. There are other places. We're here on Earth and going through our own private hell, but outside, above, somewhere, there's hope.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And that brings me back to another question of mine as well, that because I noticed in these photographs too, there was a lot, it felt of overlapping flowers and stars,
Mhm.
two symbols that have been incredibly symbolic also in the history of art, not necessarily just for Bosch, but for many different artists. And I was curious if you could unpack that a little bit.
Well, the flowers I didn't want to photograph dead flowers. I did want to photograph live, incredible flowers. But at the same time, I was very aware of their vulnerability. I mean, these are growing things that are bound to die. They're going to die fairly quickly. They're dying in the process of their growing.
Yeah,
They have one purpose in life to grow and die. And I felt that was kind of related to
yeah.
human life in Bosch.
Yes, and with the
Surrealism.
pandemic, wow.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And yeah, and that really leads me to my last question, which I was curious if you could tell us more about the themes of reality and fiction, the boundaries of reality versus imagination that is being played in this work. You've already touched on this a bit with when talking about Bosch and surrealism, but in your experience at that time, how did that interact with these photographs?
Well, one of the interesting things is at the same time that I was starting to do this work, I started to be really interested in doing some fiction writing. I'd always done a lot of writing. I've done a lot of writing mainly about photographers and about art. So I decided to try myself, see what I could do as a fiction writer. And the the process of creating fiction is really, and the kind of work that I do as a photographer are really overlap. There's a lot of the same sense of visualizing and developing the metaphor. And the metaphor is, of course, very, very important in any kind of surrealist or narrative fiction writing. And essentially that's what's going on here, that I'm really trying to work through that on both levels. I always did a lot of writing in my work, by the way. And so when I'm thinking about a body of work, I think of it in narrative terms, as if I were writing a short story.
Beautiful.
And uh, and I think in this particular one, if you saw a body of these images, then you might be able to link them together more as a story. Individually, that doesn't make it clear,
Yeah,
but that is the idea.
that's beautiful.
That is a bit like
And
writing a narrative.
yeah, that's wonderful. And that, I mean, that brings me very much back to my first question, and just kind of as a little add-on. You mentioned that your background was um, in graphic design and specifically in illustration,
Illustration, yes.
right? Does the play of the imagery that has to go with the writing, does that have sway in all of this in your creation process?
Yeah, well, there are times when I've actually written a short blurbs underneath a series of photographs to actually tell a narrative. I didn't in this particular body of work, but it's not unusual for me to do that and to think in those terms. Illustration, when I started out in illustration, I really was interested in writing, illustrating books. like children's books and that sort of thing. As I said, I didn't not fit in. I didn't fit very well into the commercial world,
Mm.
so I gave it up rather quickly. And essentially, um, the desire to tell the narrative is still there,
That's beautiful.
the
That's
work and
really,
the imaging itself.
that's really wonderful. And with surrealists, with this kind of imagery, there's so much that one can tell.
Yeah. Well, surrealists were very, very involved in the idea of a narrative. I mean, you look at some of particularly the women surrealists. They you look at their work, and there's such a body of imaging in in a single painting. There'll be all kinds of activities going on that evoke a narrative theme, and that's essentially what I was trying to do.
Wonderful, wonderful. Lastly, is there anything you wanted to add or talk about that we haven't touched on already?
Not really. I want to give a little plug to Alpha because I think that they work really hard to really support the students who work there. And I think that's quite wonderful of them to provide that. So, and they're a good little gallery.
Thank
They
you
work
so
hard.
much. Yes, they're really wonderful. We're all we all feel very lucky to be part of this for
Mhm.
sure. Well, okay, thank you so much for being here with us today. We can't wait to see your work at our exhibition titled Beyond the Image, Unveiling Hidden Narratives, which will be on view from January 14th till March 29th, 2025. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day.